Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, we use the series Band of Brothers to reveal the path of our masculine initiation. Maturation and wholeheartedness are not optional to survive the world we live in. The process begins with consent, volunteering to receive the training we need to fight the battles we will face. The process will be painful and costly, but it is a path that leads to greater life and freedom for ourselves and those entrusted to our care. Hi-ho, Silver! And let's discover God's truth in this story.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
Hello, and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and I'm very excited to be starting a series on the HBO miniseries, The Band of Brothers. This has been something that's been in the works for a couple months now. Been a lot of work, a lot of prayers, a lot of anguish over this. And as we're kicking this off, I feel like this is probably one of the most important things that we've ever done on this podcast. We are going to look at this show, these 10 episodes, as a roadmap, sort of more guidelines, more the principles of our masculine initiation. And it's taken a lot of work. It's taken a lot of effort to coordinate all the different guys to come in. It's not just me talking. And there's a reason that I'm flying solo today. When we begin this process towards maturity, towards wholeheartedness, we tend to start on our own. So many guys that we talk to when we're engaging with the men around us, there's a sense of loneliness. And I don't think this shocks anyone that men are lonely. And so as we start this journey, I'm flying by myself. I'm going by myself. It's just my voice and the clips for the next, hopefully about an hour. We'll see how it goes. Before I dive into episode 1, I want to sort of give you guys a sense of where we're going with this series, with the different episodes, what each one talks about. I'll tee up this first one, Currahee. It's where we see a lot of their training. We see a lot of Captain Sobel and the contrast with Lieutenant Winters and what makes a good leader and all that. And there's so much in each episode that we could dive into. The challenge became, what do we focus on? Where do we keep our laser vision locked in? And so for this one, we're going to talk about why initiation is so important. What does it look like? And again, why is it necessary? Then we're going to get into episode 2. And I got Britt coming in for that one. And we're going to talk about, we think we're ready when the bullets start flying. And then we land and we're by ourselves behind enemy territory. As we'll talk about later, we're paratroopers. We're used to being surrounded. So that idea of being surrounded, of being in enemy territory, and how we go from being one dude by ourselves and grow into a fire team, into a squad, into a platoon, into a company of men. And we see how that process begins to play out in real life. Episode 3, I bring in somebody who new to the podcast, Juan Velasquez. And we talk about, this is Karen Ton. This is the one that focuses on Private Blythe. And really, what do we do with fear? What do we do when fear overwhelms us? Because at some point, it's going to take over. And it could be manifested in a number of ways. So what do we do? How do we respond? What do you do when you don't think you're going to make it? And we're going to see 3 different responses from Harry Walsh, Spears, and I think he's still Lieutenant Winters. He might be Captain Winters by that point. He'll eventually become Major Winters by the end of the series. Episode 4, Replacements, one of my favorite episodes. We bring in one of my favorite guys, John Anderson, another new guy to the podcast. We ended up talking about imposter syndrome, what that means, what that looks like, how we deal with it. because that is, again, a very prevalent thing in our lives, of that feeling of, I don't really belong here, or eventually I'm going to be found out to be a fraud. And so we're going to talk about that, how to follow, how to receive guidance. And the ultimate thing is we need to move past the imposter syndrome, because the people, the brothers, the men around us need us to be present. Our family needs us to be present, even when we don't feel like it. How do we move past that? Episode 5, we're at Crossroads. I'm bringing in Whaler, and this was one of his top choices. And so we talk about winners, and this was, as I mentioned, so many of these we hear like, oh, there's so much to talk about. And in this episode, we could have spent hours talking about just Winter's leadership, what works, why he's such an amazing leader in this episode. But what we really focused on was what happened after he led that attack at the Crossroads, how he got moved from his company to the regiment, to battalion, to behind the scenes, to the sort of the headquarters group, where his life goes from leading his men to writing reports, to inventories, to all that crap that we don't want to do. But how we see that, and how he managed that setting, that season, that stage, and how that actually helped him when he had to step in. Towards the end of the episode, as we go to Bastogne, how he became more capable of taking care of the men entrusted to him. Then we go on to Bastogne, one of the harder episodes, and really the back half of this is there's a lot of hard stuff. There's a lot of heart-wrenching stuff, because our lives have heart-wrenching moments. And Brian has been on the podcast before. We did Legends of the Fall back in the day, but we talked about the power of presence, because there's times where this is the phrases that was used by their reports. Here is how we are doing. Status report. We're gaining ground. We're losing ground. It's a tug of war. We're sort of net zero. We gain ground here. We lose ground here. We're under fire. We're spread thin. We're alone. We're isolated, and there's no hope of resupply. And when Brian and I were talking, we're like, wow, this is really an appropriate description of how so many of us feel. And so how do we respond to that? How do we get through that? How do we fight for the hearts? How do we fight for our own hearts and the hearts of those around us? And we talked about the power of presence and just what that looks like to be who you say. Again, that idea of authenticity, integrity is coming out. And these are the things that it takes, right? You don't win the Super Bowl by sitting on your ass. You got to spend a lot of work in the off season, in the preseason, in training camp, in practice. Like, it takes a lot of work to win. And so these are sort of the tent poles, you might say, to support this. These are foundational principles of these are the things we're going to have to go through. How can we go through it when it hits? Episode 7, Britt came back and did Breaking Point. This was his favorite episode because of the power of Sergeant Lipton and how he led in a lack of leadership. And the phrase was, every man suffered. Men unhit by shrapnel and bullets were nevertheless casualties. And we look at that, and there's casualties in our lives. Sometimes we're the ones who are the casualties. And that's what we're going to talk about the next episode. But this idea, we see Hubler get taken out by the Luger that he'd been looking for. We see Buck Compton get taken out by the loss of his friends. How do we lead like Lipton through the loss, through the trauma? How do we hold on to that and make sure that those around us stay engaged in the fight? And like I mentioned, Last Patrol, episode 8, Andreas is coming into the studio for that. That idea of how do you engage? How do you re-engage after you get taken out? This is when Webster comes back in after being in the hospital. He's like, I've fought with these guys in Normandy, but because I wasn't in Bastogne, because I wasn't through that traumatic experience, they're treating me like a replacement. So how do we get back in? And so we'll talk about that because, again, that will happen. Stuff happens. How are we going to respond? And 9, why we fight. Whaler's coming back for that one. And that is another one that we take it. We're like, we have 3 hours of stuff that we could talk about. What are we going to talk about? What is most appropriate? And we navigate through that we probably won't dive into stuff as much as you would like because we didn't get to dive into it as much as we would like. The line from that episode is, when the fight becomes about who gets what. When we get tired of the trauma and the loss, all we want is a warm bed, warm chow, and paper to wipe our ass with. And that question that many of us get to in our 30s and our 40s, was it all worth it? And the big reminder is because we look at the enemy, like they've been looking at the Germans as the enemy. We got to fight the Germans, fight the Germans, fight the Germans. And that's not untrue, but there's a greater purpose behind it, and discovering the concentration camp, discovering the devastation to the Jewish people and the horror of what the Holocaust was really brought home of, it's not who we're fighting against. It's not hatred. That line that I can't remember who said it. The soldier fights not because of hatred for the person in front of him, but for love of the home and the people behind him. And so when we are in danger of losing heart, we were wondering, was it all worth it? Was all the stuff that we went through worth it? We have to look at the people for whom we're fighting. Look at the people who are set free from the things that we're working on. And that's what keeps us going. That's why we fight. That's a great title for the episode. And then we bring it home. Episode 10 with points. I get to talk with Conrad Schottel from Wild at Heart. We talk about the trailer, and I'll talk about survival school and sort of in our tee up, because really episodes 1 and 10 are the bookends to the story and the path. And really points to me, reminds me a lot of what heaven's going to look like, the joy, what will it feel like to be done with the battle. But the moments. There's a line in the trailer that I mentioned. It said, they gave each other the strength to make history. And that's the whole thing. You can't make it on your own. And what does making history look like for us? And that's why I think this miniseries is so awesome. I've watched it multiple times, at least twice with my youngest son, who's now 17. So we probably watched it when he was 13 or 14, maybe the first time. And it's interesting because the first few episodes are not bad. They're sort of the battle. It's when you get into Bastogne and the breaking point and why we fight and the last patrol that it gets gnarly. And as we'll talk about in our initiation, in our path to wholeheartedness, God works that way. We don't go to Bastogne typically right off the jump. We get eased into our battles, but the battles become bigger. They become more crucial. I remember reading something that said, as we get older, what felt like a big decision today, 5 years from now will look like nothing. Like you felt a lot of stress in high school asking that girl out on a date. You felt a lot of stress in college, maybe going and buy that car. But when you go to ask a girl to marry you, asking for a date seems like pretty easy stuff. Buying a house makes buying a car pale in comparison. And so thankfully, our initiation tends to be along that path of more and more, deeper and deeper, as we discover who we are, who God is, and what our purpose is here on earth. So I wanted to start episode 1 with some of the concepts that I pulled from an event I went to back in November. It was through Wild at Heart out in Colorado. It's called Survival School. And if you've been engaged with any of their stuff, there's sort of the introductory stuff with Wild at Heart, which is the boot camps or the basics, which are available online. Survival School is that next level, going deeper. And it was going way deeper, talking about spiritual warfare, talking about integration of the self. And so this whole idea of why do we need it? Why is spiritual maturity, wholeheartedness, integration of our parts, why is this important? And if you look in, especially a lot in the New Testament, there is a lot of conversations about discipline, about education, about training, about maturation. We can't be babes drinking milk the whole time. We need to grow and be able to eat meat, eat steak, wrestle with some of the harder things. And so it's just some of the lines from survival school that I wrote down that apply to this is this idea that maturity and wholeheartedness are not optional. It's mandatory. If we want to live in the world today, if we want to walk with God, if we want to accomplish all the things, all the purposes that God has designed, has planned for us, we're not going to get it if we stay immature, if we stay brokenhearted. So how do we grow in our maturity? How do we become more wholehearted? One of the stats that John Eldridge brought up was it used to be historically that the number one predictor of early mortality was poverty. And over the last several years, that's changed. And now the number one predictor of early mortality is being male. Having a penis basically means that you're more likely to die before expectations. And nobody wants that. We don't want that. So how do we fix that? How do we prevent that? How do we change that narrative? And I think that idea of narrative is important. If we look at narrative in our Christian faith, I grew up in church, became a believer. Now everything's going to be hunky-dory, no problems. You're going to get taken out because you're going to be disappointed. What are you going to do when your kid calls you having chest pain in college, stressed out because they've been drinking heavily, not knowing what to do? What are you going to do when your kid in the 20s says, hey, I just got to go pregnant? What are you going to do when they're lost in a city, refusing to answer the phone because they're gorked out on drugs, because they're pursuing they're pursuing a different path? And as we know, we would say, oh, their life's going off the rails. And we have to watch our children suffer. How do you respond when your wife dies of cancer? How do you respond when your wife leaves? How do you respond when you lose your job, when you get downsized? How do you respond when you get a promotion that's more than you can handle because you're not ready for it? I believe Dallas Willard talked about if it's spiritual, it's going to be practical. And there's so much stuff out there that talks about the concepts of theology. And I'm not saying theology is unimportant, but I need something practical. I need something to get me through the battle, through the day. I need something to prepare me for when life hits me in the face, because life will. And we'll talk about that. That was another line that came up was, you as a man are perfectly designed for the moment you're living in. And this moment is designed to take you out. Because God has an enemy, right? Satan and his minions and the fallen demons and all the work that they're doing. Again, spiritual warfare is a huge part of the New Testament. Whether it's Jesus and the disciples casting out demons, Paul talking about our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of this age. The battle is real, and it's designed to take us out. It's designed for you to lose heart. And the other thing is there is an enormous cost to walking with God. Jesus said it. Anyone who wants to follow me must pick up their cross daily. You must die. You must give up everything in order to find life. As my group of guys, we talk about, it's the hardest thing we've ever done, but it's the best thing we've ever done. Engaging with this walk, pursuing intimacy with God, pursuing our own maturation and growth as men in Christ. And when things blow up, that doesn't mean you blew it. That doesn't mean that you screwed up. You suck as a dad. You suck as a husband. You suck as a dude. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that what you're doing is opposed. And there's a reminder in the Fury trailer that every man is only as strong as the man beside him. There's no strength without struggle. And if there's no struggle, you're not going to be strong. So it's through the struggle that we can find strength. I remember talking to one of my mentors and I was like, man, I'm tired of struggling. Like everything is a struggle. He's like, instead of looking at instead of looking at it as a season of struggling, what if you reframe that as a season of strengthening? I'm getting stronger. I'm sure I've talked about this before. This idea, like if I'm lifting weights, I don't get stronger by lifting 2-pound weights forever. I've got to try to lift more than I'm able to lift. I've got to push to muscle failure in order to get stronger. And our spiritual life is just like that. And our enemy uses pain, disappointment, and heartbreak to lead us to believe that God is gone, that he has abandoned us, that we are alone in this fight. And how do we hold on to that when pain, disappointment, and heartbreak arrive? How are we going to hold on to our faith? How are we going to hold on to trusting God? How are we going to hold on to love, peace, joy, patience, all the fruit of the Spirit in the midst of the attack and the battle? And so we must organize our lives around being an apprentice, being initiated, trained, prepared, and matured for the battle for our hearts and the hearts of those entrusted to our care. So that's the setup for episode 1. And you guys will like this. I've got a bunch of clips ready to go. This is such an awesome episode, because Sobel's such an easy dude to hate. But really, when you look at it from hindsight, which we'll do in a little bit, what he did and his sort of sadistic ways of training prepared them for the realities of battle. So where does the journey start? So yes, I want to sign up. I want to be more wholehearted. I want to get my heart back. I want to walk with strength. I want to walk with maturity. I want to be unshakable, as they talk about in Hebrews. It starts with consent, right? These guys, they consented. They volunteered to go on this new airborne stuff. This was a new thing because, airplanes are relatively new back then. And Conrad and I will talk about this in the last one, about the importance of our consent, of our permission, of giving more of ourselves, giving God access and permission to more of ourselves as we go through this process. So I'm gonna pull a clip, and we hear Winters and Nixon, and they're talking, and Nixon's gonna ask Winters, "Hey, how are your men doing?" Because they're getting ready for the mission to Normandy for D-Day. They just got told to stand down, and it's hard when you get hyped up. You're ready. You're mentally prepared to get on that plane to jump into battle. You're like, nope, not today, and you got to come back in. So Nixon asks how his men are doing, and then this conversation arises that I wanted to start our conversation today with.
How are your men?
They'll be fine.
5 o'clock in New York. 4 o'clock in Chicago.
Happy hour, huh?
Yeah. Happy hour. A couple of drinks. Maybe an early dinner before the theater. Civilized place for civilized men.
Should have been born earlier, Nix.
What, and give up all this?
A civilized place for civilized men. But there's a problem with that, because the world is not civilized. You can look at the news every day. The battles, the wars across the world, the trauma, and take your pick. The world is not a civilized place. And if you think that you can survive it by being civilized, that's not going to work either, because you will get taken out. And what does taken out mean? That's a phrase we use a lot, and I'm big into definitions. So taken out means you lose heart, you lose faith, you lose trust, or you act like it's all up to you. And we'll talk about that idea that salvation is Jesus' work, but everything else, my sanctification, my maturation, my initiation, my process, that's up to me. I've got to make it work. I've got to try harder. And when that doesn't work, you just give up. You just sort of want to make life work. And we'll talk about that down the road of what happens when that happens. When you just want a little comfort, you just want a little peace, you just want to read your book. the other idea that those people at home that they're talking about going out for happy hour, getting a couple drinks there in New York and Chicago, they're not going to leave a mark on the world the way Easy Company is about to. Like, there's a reason there's a book written about them. Remember that line I talked about for episode 10? They gave each other the strength to make history. If you want to be a man who makes history, it's not going to be by being civilized. It's not going to be by taking the comfortable way out. It's going to be by volunteering and consenting to doing something new, trying something hard, failing at it, and getting up and trying again. And the reason like, I'm not it. That doesn't sound like me. Odds are you're probably not listening to this podcast. But the world needs you. Your family needs you. Your community needs you. What the world doesn't need is more education, more programs, more funding, more jobs. What the world needs is more life. They need more Jesus. They need more men whose hearts have come alive, as Howard Thurman says. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes your heart come alive, because what the world needs is men whose hearts are alive. And your heart does not come alive by being civilized. We have to enter training. We see our first real glimpse of Easy Company as Captain Sobel comes in, storms in, played by David Schwimmer. Super hard to see Ross from Friends acting like this. Such a dick. But this idea, as they're stating, these young men are they just got there. They're fresh. It was interesting for me to pull these clips because I've watched the whole series and then went back and pulled the clips from episode 1. And I'm like, I'm seeing these guys before they've gone through battle, before they've parachuted down into France, before they've endured Bastogne and Carentan and all the things, all the battles. And it's like when I've been on mission trips and I see pictures of the meetings beforehand or us at the airport. And then I see pictures from us at the end of mission. And it's like they're two different people because of what we've been through together, because we've shared a foxhole. And so this is a bunch of initiates, a bunch of young men getting ready. They said, yes, this is like Isaiah, here I am, Lord. But when you volunteer for that, everything's not going to go smoothly. And if you think it will, you're going to be disappointed. You're going to be shocked. But if you're prepared for it, you can handle it better. So here's Captain Sobel coming in to inspect the company. And as you expect, he finds some issues.
You people are at the position of attention! Private Picante, have you been blousing your trousers over your boots like a paratrooper?
No, sir.
That explains the creases at the bottom.
No excuse, sir.
Volunteering for the parachute infantry is one thing, Picante, but you've got a long way to prove that you belong here. Your weekend pass is revoked. Name?
Lord Judge.
Dirt in the rear sight aperture. Pass revoked. When did you sew on these chevrons, Sergeant Lipton?
Yesterday, sir.
Long enough to notice this. Revoked.
Sir.
Name?
Malarkey, Donald G.
Malarkey. Malarkey's slang for bullshit, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Rust on the butt plate hinge spring, Private bullshit. Revoked. Name?
Please God, Joseph D. Shutt.
Rusty bayonet, Liebgott. You want to kill Germans?
Yes, sir.
Not with this. I wouldn't take this rusty piece of shit to war, and I will not take you to war in your condition. Now, thanks to these men and their infractions, every man in the company who had a weekend pass has lost it. Change into your PT gear. We're running Currahee.
And what sounds like harshness and criticism is actually kindness. You can't fight with this rusty bayonet, and I'm not going to fight with you. You are not ready. And they're not. They're not ready for the realities of war. And that's what Sobel's going to be preparing them for. And it was interesting as I was looking over each one of the things that he was finding wrong. In the first one with Percani, he was blousing his trousers because that's what the paratroopers did. But he's not a paratrooper yet. So what Sobel's doing is he's hitting the pride. He's like, you're not there yet. You might want to be there one day. You're not ready yet. You're not ready to go to war yet. Dirt in the rear sight. How can you fight if you can't see? It reminded me a little bit of again, what Jesus talks about with we focus on other people's specks without seeing the log in our eyes. And what Sobel is doing is you've got a log, you've got a log, you've got a log. And he's saying this needs to be fixed so you can be effective fighting machines when you hit the beaches, when you drop out of the airplanes. I'm not taking you to war because you're not ready. There's thread on his chevrons. Sure, he got promoted, but just because you get promoted doesn't mean you can't pay attention to the details. Private malarkey, private bullshit. Hitting his identity. Who are you? It's like, you're not even worthy a name. You're malarkey. It's slang for bullshit. And that doubt, and we're going to touch on that here in just a second, that doubt of who he is, who he can be, it sounds like an attack, but it actually needs to be strengthened. You need to be stronger. You need to be bigger than this. You can't give in to those doubts and those fears in order to be fighting. And the same thing with the bayonet. On the one hand, you've got the dirt in the rear sight, which is seeing, which is a long range attack. Rusty bayonet, that's for close action. And if you're close action, if that rusty bayonet gets stuck in the sheath, you'll die. And so each thing that he's talking about is, this is what you need globally to become a man, to become an effective soldier that won't get taken out as soon as they hit the ground. It's interesting because Currahee means, they said during their run, they say, what does it mean? We stand alone. He says, don't help that man, which is, again, not army or military doctrine, because it is about your team. It is about no man left behind. Sobel in these scenes, in these early part of the series, he has to attack those because those need to be exposed. Those flaws need to be exposed before we get into battle, because battle will expose them. We've talked many times on the podcast about trauma, loss, suffering exposes who we are. It magnifies who we are. It amplifies who we are. And if who we are is broken, it's just going to amplify and increase our brokenness. But if we can be a man of integrity, a man of wholeheartedness, then we can rise to the challenge and shine in those moments of darkness. And I'm going to play one more clip, and then I want to get into a little bit of Bible verses. And this clip is, Lieutenant Winters gets a promotion from second lieutenant to first lieutenant. He's going to be the company XO. This is the scene where it's like, oh, we're going to have a light day tomorrow. Spaghetti sounds good. And so here they are sitting mentally prepared for a comfortable afternoon in class, enjoying a heavy, big, filling, warm lunch when it's raining outside. And Sobel comes in and interrupts all that.
Orders changed! Get up! Lectures are canceled! The Easy Company is running up Currahee! Move! Move! 3 miles up, 3 miles down. Hi-yo, Silver! Let's go! Let's go! You're a washout, Private Hoobler! You should pipe up those ears and go home! Looks like Gordon's done! Aren't you, Gordon? You finished? You do not deserve to get your wing! Private Randleman, you look tired! There's an ambulance waiting for you at the bottom of the hill! It can all be over right now! No more pain! No more Currahee! No more Captain Sobel! Pull upon the rises, we fall on the grass. We never land upon our feet, we always hit our ass. Aye, Christ almighty, who the hell are we? Zim, zam, goddamn, we're on infantry.
And you actually see in that scene that Sobel gets a sense of pride when that's their response to his invitation. And I've done some reading on SEALs training and what that looks like. And they actually do have a similar thing where they treat them unfairly. Because battle is unfair. Oh, you showed up early? I'm going to punish you as if you were late. You did that perfectly. You're still going to get out. You're going to go get wet and dusty. And that idea, like, you can do it right and still fail. Winters did what Sobel asked him to. He spaghetti for lunch, and the look that he gives him is I gotcha. And Winters sees it in the cafeteria there, and it was just, this is such a great series. I love it. But that idea, like, what do you do when life treats you unfairly? How are you going to do it? Because those doubts, again, you're a washout, Hoobler. You don't deserve to be a paratrooper. Are you tired? It can all go away. It reminds me of the end of Braveheart, where I don't even remember, the priest guy, he's like, all your suffering can go away if you just give up. If you just kiss the symbol of the throne. If you just subjugate yourself to the power of the enemy. They do the same thing at SEALs training today. If you want to leave, you just go, put off your helmet, ring the bell, you're out of here. While you're sitting there in the surf, cold, wet, tired, dusty, dirty, everywhere, because it's the beach, it can all go away. And there's actually kindness because this is happening in training. And Conrad and I are going to dive into this verse a little more from Revelation, where it talks about the return of the king, and with him are the called, the chosen, and the faithful. And how that's a funnel that leads down. Are you going to be faithful when you're tired, when you're doubtful, when you're puking your guts up and wondering what hell you have volunteered for? When the devil is saying, man, I can make it all go away. Just, you're feeling alone, you're feeling rejected. Look at the porn. Here you go. Your wife hasn't given you any sex in weeks or months. Well, you deserve it. You deserve better. Let's go look at this website while she's asleep. Have that second, third, fourth drink because you've had a hard day at work. You deserve this. You don't need to go through this. Your kid's all jacked up. Man, you're a better dad than that. You don't need to put up with this shit. You've dealt with it for 24 years. I'm tired. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to engage. I just want to play a little golf, watch a little football. I don't want to deal with my kids' problems. I don't want to deal with my wife's depression. I don't want to deal with my shitty boss. And we get invitations to check out, to look for a little bit of relief, something to soothe the pain, soothe the anguish, sometimes soothe the boredom. But that's not who we're called to be. You're like, Paul, I don't know what you're talking about, man. It talks about Jesus says, my burden, are you worn out? Are you tired? My yoke is easy and my burden is light, right? That doesn't sound like Jesus. All right, well, I'm going to prove you wrong here. Because the writer of Hebrews, and I did this in the Message version because I liked the way it phrased it. In some of the other versions, it talks about discipline. And because we associate discipline with punishment, I wanted to sort of ease off of that. Although discipline is just training. If somebody is in training, they're showing discipline. They're saying no to something to say yes to something else. So in Hebrews 12 from the Message, starting in verse 4, in this all-out match against sin, others have suffered far worse than you, to say nothing of what Jesus went through. So don't feel sorry for yourselves. Or have you forgotten how good parents treat children, and that God regards you as his children? My dear child, don't shrug off God's discipline, and don't be crushed by it either. It's the child he loves that he disciplines. The child he embraces, he also corrects. God is educating you. That's why you must never drop out. He's treating you as dear children. This trouble you're in isn't punishment. It's training. The normal experience of children. Only irresponsible parents leave children to fend for themselves. Would you prefer an irresponsible God? We respect our own parents for training and not spoiling us, so why not embrace God's training so we can truly live? While we were children, our parents did what seemed best to them. But God is doing what is best for us, training us to live God's holy best. At the time, discipline isn't much fun. It always feels like it's going against the grain. Later, of course, it pays off big time, for it's the well-trained who find themselves mature in their relationship with God. When I look at my grandson, or even my children, did I want them eating cotton candy before dinner? Did I want them eating ice cream for breakfast? Did I want them just watching TV all day? No, that's discipline. Hey, do something else. Get outside. No, you've got to wait for dinner. No, you need to eat your vegetables before you can have dessert. And even now, my grandson, he gets super frustrated, and it's a little heartbreaking for me. He'll be coloring, and he's 4. He just turned 4. He's coloring, and he goes outside the lines. He's like, oh, I ruined it. And he doesn't want to do it anymore. Or he'll try riding a bike, and he'll fall down a couple times, and he's like, I can't do it. I was like, Kason, you're learning. You're just learning. You're going to mess up. It's okay. You're still learning. Told that to the boys when they were playing football. Make mistakes once. Yeah, you're going to get busted for a touchdown every now and then. Make mistakes once. Learn from your mistakes. Learn from your errors. It's all learning. Take that approach of it's all learning. In Revelation 3, when Jesus is talking to the church at Laodicea, he says, those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. So be earnest and repent. And repent is not always, God, I'm sorry for my sin. It's, oh, I've been living in this way. I need to turn and do it something else. This way is not working. I need to do something else. Here I am, Jesus says. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. Again, this is not a conversion verse. This is Jesus is standing at the door of your heart. You're a believer. This is to the church. So where is Jesus knocking and saying, hey, I'm inviting you. If you invite me in, we're going to have a great adventure. It's going to be hard, but that's because I love you and I want you to become wholehearted. And it's not just a New Testament thing, because in Job 5, he said, blessed is the one whom God corrects. So do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. Like I recently had some friends come over and help me replace the steps on leading off of my deck in the backyard. I didn't know what I'm doing. And there's some stuff that I would have done wrong. And so they said, no, don't set this up this way. Do it this way. And again, we think that if we get corrected, that we're screwing up, that it's some sort of failure or punishment. I like that phrase, I think from Hebrews, that idea of punishment. It's not punishment. It's learning. It's correction. It's a father's guiding of saying, oh no, don't do it like this. That's going to end up hurting you in the long run. If you think you're a paratrooper already, that pride is going to get you when you're stuck in the mud at Bastogne. Or if you think you've arrived, you're going to get taken out all that much more easily. If you've got dirt in your rear sight, you're not going to see the person you're trying to shoot. You're not going to see the enemy coming for you, and he's going to take you out because he sees you. One of the more quotable and known verses from Proverbs 3, it starts with trust in the Lord with all your heart, to not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. And again, going down to 11, which I think probably the writer of Hebrews was quoting here. My child, don't reject the Lord's discipline and don't be upset when he corrects you. For the Lord corrects those he loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights. I don't normally throw out all these Bible verses at you, but I also don't normally do this by myself. So I was like, hey, don't listen to me. Listen to what God says through the Bible. And then finally, Paul in 1 Corinthians, the end of chapter 9, he says, do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Civilized people, comfortable people sitting in Chicago and New York City are not going to get a prize. But everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. Why do they do it? They do it to get a crown that will not last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. My son and my dad a couple years ago ran in a 5K over Christmas, and they got, a little medal, a little award, took a picture. It meant something then. Now, a few years later, it's probably not that big a deal. What crowns are we striving for that don't last? Like a laurel crown to prove that they were the winner. And, that it's greenery. It's going to go bad in like a week. The leaves will turn brown. It'll fall apart. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. This will take some work. If I'm training for a marathon, I can't just show up and go run for it. I've got to set aside training time. If I'm going to box, I can't just shadow box, because if I do just fight, mirror fighting or just sort of punching the air, that's not going to prepare me to take the punch. And life is going to punch. And so why do we do this? I'm going to go to the scene. Now they've gone from Toccoa, running Currahee. They're actually paratroopers now. They're in England. They're training to go fight. They're training. They trained for like 2 years before they were ready for battle. And there's a scene because Buck, another great character, he's a platoon leader within Easy Company. And he and Winters are having a conversation as they're driving to see them. He says, why do they do this? Why have they chosen this profession? Why have they put themselves through this? And then again, towards the end, as leaders, is what does that mean for us?
These men have been through the toughest training the Army has to offer, under the worst possible circumstances. And they volunteered for it.
Christ, Dick, I was just shooting crap through them. It's not like
You know why they volunteered? So when things got really bad, the man in the foxhole next to them would be the best. Not some draftee who's gonna get them killed.
Are you ticked because they like me? Because I'm spending time to get to know my soldiers? I mean, come on. You've been with these guys for what, 2 years? I've been here for 6 days.
We're gambling, Buck.
So what? Soldiers do that. I don't deserve a reprimand for it.
What if you'd won?
What?
What if you'd won? Never put yourself in a position where you can take from these men.
Why did they volunteer? Because they wanted to know that the person next to them in their foxhole is the best. And I've got a group of guys on Tuesday nights, and John Anderson's one of them who we're going to hear from in episode 4. Andreas is another one who we're going to hear from in episode 8. And we've been through shit together. Men have lost their fathers. Men have gone through loss of friends, struggled in their marriages, struggled with their kids. And we've been there together. We've been through the training. We've prayed together. We've cried together. We've laughed together. When we end up as in Bastogne and the breaking point, when the artillery is coming, exploding the trees around us, these are men who I trust in the foxhole beside me. They're not going to run away and hide. They're not going to just sit there in the foxhole with their hands over their ears, pretending this isn't happening. They're going to engage in the battle with me, and they are the best. And we need that. We need that in our lives. That's what keeps us from being that number one on the predictor of early mortality. That's what keeps us from fighting bravely and dying quickly. We need the men. They gave each other strength to make history. And history is not writing a book. It's not becoming the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. It's not accomplishing all these things. History is leaving a legacy of faith, of loving your children well, even when they're not that lovable. Loving your wife, serving your wife as Christ serves the church. And how do we do that? Well, that's what this whole series is about. We're going to walk through these guideposts, trail markers. If you're walking the Appalachian Trail, every now and then there's a blaze, a trail marker on a tree or on a post saying, yep, you're going the right direction. So these aren't sequential. It's not necessarily a roadmap, but maybe a treasure map of saying, hey, this is going to happen. Here's how to get through it. This is going to happen. Here's how to get through it. Here's how you grow in faith. Here's how you grow your body of believers. You're not alone. And as we'll talk about, this whole idea of it starts with one. So as we embark on this journey, there's 3 clips I wanted to use to close. And I want to use it from bottom to top. Because the night before Easy Company took off, before D-Day happened, before Normandy happened, think of that scene from Saving Private Ryan. Before that happened, before they jumped into enemy territory. And by the way, I love the vision of when Jesus came, and we just celebrated Christmas, and in Christmas, the birth of Christ, the crucifixion of Christ, and the resurrection and ascension of Christ. That was the beachhead. That was D-Day for heaven. To say, hey, no, we're taking our sons and daughters back. I'm coming for freedom. And as Paul says in Galatians, it is for freedom that we have been set free. We haven't been set free just to go to church, just to run organizations, just to be a nice guy. We have been set free for, as we'll talk about in episode 9, to set others free. And we can't lose sight of that. That has to be our vision. That has to be our purpose. Because anything less than that will get taken out. So I want to start with the words to the men. And as Lieutenant Winters is going to say, I'll see you in the assembly area. I'll see you next week. We're going to hit the ground running with Britt next week. And then as Lutz reads the letter from Colonel Sink of tonight is the night of nights. And you're now ready to exercise all that you have trained for. And it is a life or death battle. We're not just sitting around in a coffee shop, but there's so much more going on behind the scenes if you see it, if you engage in it, if you seek freedom, if you seek wholeheartedness, if you seek your initiation and maturation. As you pursue that and welcome Christ into that, you're going to see a greater battle than anything you could have imagined. You're going to make history. And that's the last one from Dwight Eisenhower. I actually pulled this from the like a radio address of his message to the Allied Expeditionary Force, because you are a part of that. You are a part of a greater force. You're not alone. And we have a mission. Some men will get taken out along the way. Sometimes you'll get injured. You'll get knocked out. It's like, man, I gotta step back. I gotta recover because that hurt. But the hurt is for a purpose, as we've been talking about. God disciplines those he loves. Oh, this happened. It's not punishment, it's training. It's not struggle, it's strengthening. And when you changed the way you look at the world, when you change your perception, when you change your perspective, and you invite Jesus into it, Jesus, this hurt like hell. I thought my kid was going to do better. I thought my kid was going to make it to see age 22. I thought, Jesus, help me here. Because no matter what, if you are physically alone in this world, you're never alone. You always have Jesus to go to. Jesus, help me. He stands at the door and knock. Invite him into your initiation. Invite him into your volunteering. Say, Jesus, I want to do that. I want to become a soldier like these men of Easy Company, to take the fight to the enemy, to liberate the world around me. I need you to do that. So good luck. God bless. I'll see you at the assembly area.
Second platoon, listen up. Good luck. God bless you. I'll see you in the assembly area.
Soldiers of the regiment, tonight is the night
of nights. Today, as you read this, you are en route to the great adventure for which you have trained for over 2 years.
That's why they gave us ice cream.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?